the founder of Storyville, an agency dedicated to creating and promoting human-centered marketing for cities. While people make stories and stories make places, Phil makes magic by capturing and conveying the human experience through the photos he takes and the stories he shares.
So first and foremost, thank you so much, Phil Eich, Mayor of Storyville, for joining me here and having this conversation.
I'm excited when Jason mentioned your name and told me a little bit about AwareNow. I was like, oh, this is my jam. I love what you guys are doing, so it's awesome to be here.
From one storyteller to another, I would love to have an off-the-cuff, unscripted conversation. And if you could just start us off, where is Storyville? How do I get there? Where is it? Because I want to move there, quite honestly.
Well, the Storyville lives on in each one of our hearts. Well, so Storyville lives on the internet, but where Storyville really lives is in every single community. The thing that doing the work that I do has really opened my eyes to is how amazing almost every single person you will meet actually is. I work in large communities or small communities, and so many of our communities have issues with self-esteem. Like, there's nothing good here, or I wish we were like this, or we wish we were these communities. And meanwhile, in every single one of these communities, you have people with the most incredible stories. And we don't know them. We don't know them. We don't know them as humans. We don't know those stories. And so to me, Storyville is really kind of this metaphor that every town, every community, every city is Storyville, because you walk into a breakfast place and the waitress bringing you your omelet, she has some kind of amazing story. And you walk outside and the guy that bumps into you on the sidewalk, he has some part of his story that will just blow your mind. And that is incredible to me.
Mm-hmm. It absolutely is. And to your point, we don't know our people around us. I feel like anymore we know, we certainly are all aware of particular hashtags, particular profiles, but actual people, first, last name, what's your story, we don't know.
Yep. One of the purposes of this storytelling work is to really take this idea of community back to the most basic building block, which is two people in real life sitting across from each other saying, I want to know you better. And for all the good that our communities do, economic development and community development, and how do we get more small businesses and all of that stuff, how do we grow an economy, all very important. But meanwhile, in the process, what we're missing is the transformative power of intentional interaction.
Yes, absolutely. So, have you always wanted to be a storyteller? Is that when you were 5 years old? When I grew up, I'm gonna be a storyteller.
Oh, not at all. This work was never a passion of mine. It didn't start off that way. Like a lot of people, you must be so passionate about photography and writing and things like that. And I am now, but it really started because I used to be a middle school teacher. I used to teach 5th and 6th grade. And from the moment I stepped into the classroom, I knew that the classroom wasn't going to be my forever home. I love kids. I love the act of teaching. I'm infatuated with this act of teaching someone something. But I had a lot of issues with the educational system. And kids would raise their hand, Mr. Eich, why are we learning this? And I would say, I don't know. I really don't know. And so I knew right away, this isn't going to be my forever home. So right after the recession of 2008, my twin brother moved in with me because he lost his job, and I was living in a house by myself at the time. And I said, move in with me while you figure out what your next step is going to be. And his next step was to start building acoustic guitars in my garage. And a very specific kind of guitar made out of steel. It's a steel body acoustic resonator guitar. And unbeknownst to us, he was one of 3 people in the world to build these guitars by hand. And so his wait list for his guitars skyrocketed to 3 years. People would put down a deposit, they'd have to wait 3 years. Not a real way to run a business, and I was looking for a way out of teaching, so I said, Matt, let me work for you to help you start this business and catch up and things like that. So I left teaching, we moved to Saginaw, Michigan, and things were going really, really well. Neither one of us knew anything about business, neither one of us knew anything about marketing. I had a little bit of an experience with photography, so I got drafted along with building the guitars to run our social media. And because we didn't know anything about marketing, we had no idea where to start, but what we knew was we didn't want to look like all the other guitar builders in the handmade world, because that shtick is, you're paying us $25,000 for the world's most perfect instrument. God himself has separated the clouds and given the world this instrument. Like, it's all bullshit, really. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't us, because here we are just kind of fumbling our way through. So we took a very documentary style approach to what we were doing. This is what we're doing today. This is the guitar we screwed up. This is the guitar we didn't screw up. Here's, we'd play games with people on social media, things like that. Mm-hmm. And it worked really, really well. Mm-hmm. And it was going really well, but because it was a startup business, I ended up really poor. And things got to the point where I started having to buy my groceries with a credit card. Mm-hmm. And the turning point came at a grocery store in Saginaw. And I went to the store, I bagged up my single bag of food, and I swiped my credit card at the self-checkout lane, and it was declined because I had maxed out my credit card on food. And so I had to shamefully leave my groceries there and walk out in the parking lot. I said, oh, this is what being broke is like. Mm-hmm. And then the next question was like, how do I get out of this? Yeah. And what is something I could do right now that people could pay me money for? Because I didn't have time to go back to school. Getting a minimum wage job wouldn't have helped me out of the hole I was in. So I thought about this idea of, well, if my brother needs me to take photos and on social media, other small businesses might need to do the same too. So also at the time, I was dealing with debilitating social anxiety, and it was to the point where I could not talk to anybody outside of my family. And I knew things were getting bad when my girlfriend, now wife at the time, had sent me a text when I was building guitars at work, and she said that we were invited to a wedding. Mm-hmm. And immediately I was terrified of going to this wedding, because going to a wedding meant that there was a wedding reception, and a wedding reception meant talking to strangers. And so for the next 2 months, no exaggeration, I would clock in at work, and I would sit at the workbench, and I would compulsively obsess about all the excuses I could use to get out of going to this wedding reception. And I'm not quite sure how it happened, but I started to realize, like, this is not normal. This is going to, if I don't do something now, affect the rest of my life. I'm never going to meet somebody new, make a new friend, make a new connection or anything. So how am I going to fix this? Well, I had a background in music previously, and the idea when you're practicing music is that you break a gigantic piece of music down to its littlest parts. Mm-hmm. Can you practice just this one measure with just the right hand until you have it perfected, and then you add the left hand, and then you add the next measure, and you can do something impossible. So I was standing in that parking lot, I was like, well, I have 2 really big problems right now. I can't talk to people, and I don't have any money. Mm. So the idea was, I'm gonna take my camera, and I'm gonna go into random small businesses in Saginaw, and I'm gonna offer them 60 minutes of free photos, because I needed photos for a portfolio in order to get clients. Mm-hmm. And what that would do is it would not only get me photos for my portfolio, but for 60 minutes, it would give me practice talking to strangers, because the camera was this way to feel safe, and it was this way to be curious, and there was a reason I was there, because I had a camera. And then on top of that, I found that I was most comfortable talking to people about work. If they wanted to talk to me about guitars, I could do that, because that's about guitars. If I was talking to them about their small business, I was more comfortable. And so these 60-minute sessions gave me a way to dig myself out of being broke, but at the same time, it allowed me to practice asking people questions. Why did you name your business this? And why, what do you love about baking cakes? And so I started my business first working for small businesses, just creating content on social media, and it was not a passion at all. It was absolutely a necessity. It was the one skill I had that people could pay me money for. And even for the first 2 or 3 years, I would not call myself a photographer, because I didn't see myself as a photographer. I'm making things that people pay me money for, and a photographer is something completely else. That's for people that love photography and chase it as a craft and things like that. That's not me. But after I transitioned from working for small businesses to working for communities, that's when it became a passion, because I saw what I was missing through my social anxiety, and just how these interactions with people, I call them little nudges, nudged me to being a completely different person, living a completely different life, not necessarily because of something I intentionally did, but because all of these stories and all of these conversations kind of nudged me into what people call a community storyteller.
That is an incredible story. Wow. And so what a journey. What a journey it's been.
Yeah, that was about 7 years ago when that started.
Wow. And so how many stories have you told now?
I think since I started working for communities 4 years ago, it's somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000. About 3,000 interviews is the name or the number I use.
That's incredible. That's incredible. And now I have to ask this question, one storyteller to another. Do you feel that, let me see, how can I ask? So for me, next month we'll have told over 1,000 stories. And I feel like because of that, I have lived 1,000 different lives. And I have this depth of a life experience. Do you feel okay? You feel
so? Yes, and I love that you asked this question, because when I go and I speak to communities, one of the biggest pushbacks I get to storytelling is that it's feel goody and fluffy, but we need numbers and we need data and we need hard evidence that this creates change in our world. And so what I tell them is that storytelling is not just warm and fuzzy make-believe. It's literally science. And so, inside our brains we have neurons. And neurons fire whenever you do or experience something. So I pick up that cup, neurons fire. But within those neurons, there's a very special kind of neuron called a mirror neuron. And those guys are special because when I observe you pick up that cup, they fire in my brain in the exact same place and the same way as if I'm picking up that cup. And so when somebody is telling a story, or you have this moment of interaction, what happens is something called brain-to-brain coupling. And so my brain is firing in the same way that your brain is firing in the exact same place, creating a real physiological connection. And so when you say that you feel that you've lived 1,000 lives, it's because to your brain you have lived 1,000 lives. That's the reason why we say I got lost in a book, because to your brain you are literally in that book. And so when we have these intentional conversations and we tell these stories, our brain is functioning in a way as I did live in South Africa. I did grow up homeless in LA. I did experience racism. I did experience all of these things because they're firing as if we lived those parts of those people's lives ourselves. And that is fascinating to me because it's more than just passion and it's more than just fluff. It's a basic fundamental function of how we are designed as humans to interact with other humans, and that's incredible to me.
It is, in fact, then, to your point, sort of this element of empathy.
Yes.
Right?
Yep. That's how empathy happens. It's because your brain is firing, like, you have sympathy where I am sad for you that you went through that. Empathy is I can feel that. And I used to be under the impression that to really empathize with somebody, you had to experience homelessness. You had to experience racism. And you do to a certain extent. There's levels of empathy. But when I started learning about the science of it, what's amazing to me is that everyone can experience the power of storytelling and experience a depth of empathy because our brains can fire in that way. Not to the level of, like, I lived for a decade on the streets of Detroit homeless, but there's a little part of our brain that if we are open to sitting down and listening to somebody else, you can authentically empathize with them. And that has been the biggest gift I think storytelling has given me. Is I was so sequestered in a life of social anxiety that I didn't have any interaction. And because I didn't have any interaction, I didn't have any sort of empathy. I wasn't outwardly hateful, but there was an emotional disconnection from people I just couldn't overcome. And the gift that this has given me is most of the time, if somebody is telling me a story that is intense or sad or they've overcome something immense, I will sob through it. And people, like, they've lived it, they don't get it. Like, well, Phil, why are you crying? It's because, like, I'm so cracked open at this point where my brain is like, Phil, like, this is getting pretty intense. You can feel those emotions, and that has been an incredible gift.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think it's also, I mean, there's a reason when we're watching a scary movie, like,
yes,
you're not really about to get stabbed.
Everybody jumps at the same time.
Yeah.
It's because your brain thinks that you're in the movie. Yep.
Oh, that's so... I've got goosebumps. Like, true, legit
But
goosebumps.
see, that's the power of it, because, like, why storytelling? It's not just, like, this cool little passionate thing. It's how we communicate as humans. And it's a skill, it's an experience that's available to everyone.
Yeah.
Everyone can experience it. You don't have to call yourself a storyteller. You don't have to be an extrovert. You don't have to do all of these things. If you just approach every human interaction with, that is another human sitting across from me, selling me my groceries, whatever it is, and acknowledging that, you become a storyteller.
Yeah.
How's business going? That's a story. I love these clothes. Why'd you pick these clothes to fill your store? There's a story there. Like, every day, this is an everyday opportunity for all of us to experience the power of storytelling. And that's what I want people to understand, is that it's not just in a magazine, and it's not just on YouTube, and it's not just on Netflix. You walk out the door of your house in the morning, there's an infinite opportunity for you to experience the lives of other people by simply saying, tell me your story.
Absolutely. And then that degree of connection, right? So there's a reason, I think, where we so very often will say, like, oh, we've become so disconnected from one another, because it's not just a physical disconnection, but there is this emotional disconnection. We've become so siloed, and that stories have the ability to break down those silos, bring us together. And to your point, it is just like if you share a story, you learn something new about someone. Oh, hey, I grew up in Grand Rapids. Hey, I lived in Grand Rapids. Where from? All of a sudden, you're connected. And you're not strangers anymore. Instantly.
And that is tremendous to me, and it on one hand it fills me with a lot of excitement, because there's so much potential. Like, all of us want to change the world in some way, but most of us won't change the world on the large scale. But what we can do is, through these interactions and through these stories and through these building of connections and relationships, I can change my world because I perceive it differently. And then in turn, I can change somebody else's world because they perceive the world differently. For instance, I walk into a Walgreens and I'm buying Benadryl for one of my sick kids. and I throw it on the counter, and there's an older lady across the counter, and she scans it, and she's like, you have a rewards card or whatever they say. And I say something like, you sound like you're from the South. All of a sudden what happens is this woman who was living a sad day, she's at work, all of a sudden somebody is interested in her. Her world changes in that moment, because she could have been going through that day saying, nobody cares about me, I'm just selling people stuff, I hate this job, whatever. But then all of a sudden somebody looks at her and says, you sound like you're from the South. And now she feels seen, and she feels heard, and she feels like she's important to someone. And I don't know what happens to her when she walks out of that Walgreens, but in that moment, there's a chance that her world has changed.
Yeah, absolutely. And so how powerful, right? Like to be seen,
Yes.
be heard. And we talk about what is the value of that. And the way I think about it, it's that whole, well, if a tree falls and no one hears it, we kind of start asking ourselves, if I'm talking, if I'm here, but no one sees me, no one hears me, like, what's the point? Do I exist? Do I matter?
Yes.
And that a story, a telling or a hearing of a story can change that, can have an impact on that.
Yep. Oprah Winfrey, over the course of her news and talk show career, she interviewed 37,000 people. And somebody asked her, what do they have in common? And she said the one thing they have in common is that every single person you will ever meet has the same desire to be seen, to be heard, and to feel important. And that's a basic, fundamental human need. That's why we shop where we shop. That's why we buy from brands that's where we move. That's why we have relationships with the people that we do, is because somehow they check off those boxes. And it sounds super silly, but like Apple, for instance. Why does every creative person, designer, photographer have a MacBook Pro? It's because in their marketing, Apple has said, creatives, we see you. We see what you need, and we're going to give you what you need. And every creative is like, oh, it's so perfect. Now, in the base level, is it that much different than like a Windows operating computer? No, it's not. But what Apple has done, it's intentionally said to creative people, we see you, and we're going to give you something that you want. And that connects with us in some kind of way. So what's also fascinating, I think, about storytelling is that it operates on so many different levels. Yeah. Sometimes the obstacle is like, but I don't have a good story, or I'm not a good storyteller, or like I don't know what questions. And it doesn't matter, because it can be as simple as like, you will never guess what happened to me at work today, and now you're a storyteller. And it's an activity that we can all experience every single day in different levels, and that's fascinating to me.
Right, totally agree. And it's just that allowing yourself to be present, to be in the moment with someone.
Yes.
Like, let's share a moment, you know?
Yep.
Another thing I'm curious about, so I used to look at people and see people, oh, that's so-and-so, or that's a stranger, be able to identify people that way. After the things that I have done, after things that you have done, do you now see people? I see people differently. I see them as stories. I see this is a story. This isn't necessarily just a person. This is a story. You see, I feel like the depth of them, not the what of them, but does that make any sense?
It makes a lot of sense. I use the word, I like your word depth. I use the word a lot of times of complexity, that people aren't simple, and we love to simplify people beyond their humanity. You're a Republican, you're a Democrat, and what that does to our brain, it says, I now know everything I need to know about you as a human because I see that you're a Republican, or I see that you're a Democrat. But that's not people. That's not how people work. I mean, like here we are talking about storytelling and how people are amazing. And I will tell you, like, I am still very much a human. There are some people I meet, I'm like, oh my gosh, just stop talking. Like, I'm not interested in this. I'm not curious about this. Like, I know I need to be better, but that is also evidence that people are complex. Here I am interviewing thousands of people, and it's still a process for me. You'd think I'd have it nailed down. I'd be able to walk into a room and talk to every single person. And that social anxiety is still incredibly present with me. A couple weeks ago, my brother had a kind of an open house before a concert at his guitar shop, and I went just to kind of hang out. And I walked into that room going, I forgot what terror feels like in these situations. And I went and I grabbed some barbecue and I sat down at his desk and I didn't talk to a person. And that experience, along with all of these storytelling experiences, really showed me the depth of people and how the only way that you can really touch the true depth of a person is by asking them questions. And if you're not willing to take the time to interact with them or ask them questions or really give them a space to get to know them, you have no right to judge whoever they are. And that can be a hard pill to swallow, because we love saying you are terrible, I'm going to stay away from you because I know everything there, but you don't. Right. You don't. And that's a lifelong pursuit and a lifelong challenge, and really something to fall back on, I think, is just understanding how complicated people are, how beautiful we can be, how terrible we can be, how fallible we are, just how inspiring, we are infinite. I think it's Walt Whitman that said we are infinite, and that is absolutely true.